your face. If you don't want your face on the recording, you can mute your stop your video, and you're welcome to change your name too. If you want to be completely anonymous, you can do that with the 3 little dots, and it'll say change name. And I think we all know how to be together in community, so I won't go through a long list of all of the covenantal things. I think we're all first you people that I'm seeing are friends of, so I'm sure we'll be okay. During the talk, I will be monitoring the chat just for safety. But Marge was saying before she's probably not going to catch the chat during the presentation, and so you might not want to use that for questions. There'll be time for questions afterwards. So with that, I will light up our chalice, and I'll do that first before I talk. So I can't do 2 things. I thought we could open with some words by Thich Nhat Hanh. People usually consider walking on water or in thin air a miracle. But I think the real miracle is not to walk either on water or in thin air, but to walk on earth. Every day we are engaged in a miracle which we don't even recognize. A blue sky, white clouds, green leaves, the black curious eyes of a child. To our own 2 eyes, all is a miracle. And so welcome. And with that, I will turn it over to Marge and Keith.
Thank you, Tony. What a beautiful writing by Thich Nhat Hanh. And as is part of our tradition, before we get started officially, Keith is going to what we call invite the bell. Thank you, Keith. And welcome, dear friends. I think there's only one name I'm not sure of on the screen. It's wonderful to see so many of you here this evening as Keith and I share our recent journey to Vietnam. We'll be showing you a lot of pictures and talking about experiences and some of our lessons learned or insights. And we'll start off with some comments before the pictures, and then we'll do a running commentary while showing you photos. And then at the end, share some of our takeaways. And then you'll have an opportunity to make comments, ask questions. So if you can hold them just so that I don't get quite as jumbled up in my mind, that would be great. But if there's a burning question, please go ahead and ask it. We're pretty informal kind of folks. And as probably most of you know, Keith and I have been very long time Unitarian Universalists, both of us since we were back in grade school. And Keith has been at this church since when?
1957.
Okay, and I came in 86, or 85. So we're committed Unitarian Universalists, but along the way, we also became Buddhists and are very grateful that we are able to practice that in a way that is completely in line with our church's faith as well. And we got introduced to Thich Nhat Hanh, who we lovingly refer to as Thay, meaning teacher, in 2009 in person. But I actually had attended an adult RE class in the Santa Monica UU Church back in the early 80s, where I was introduced to his book, The Miracle of Mindfulness, a beautiful book. So then when we learned that he was going to be visiting San Diego, we were excited to go. We went to one evening workshop with him and learned that there was also going to be a retreat with Thich Nhat Hanh at Deer Park Monastery near Escondido. And so in 2009, we went to that retreat and spent 5 days with Thich Nhat Hanh. And that was life transformative. And I see Loretta's shaking her head. She's also deeply involved with this practice. And more recently, Tom Owenthal has been a part of that Sangha as well. So it's wonderful to be sharing both the UU connection and Buddhism. And go ahead, Keith.
At the end of that week-long retreat with Thay, we'd fallen in love. I'd fallen in love with Thay, with his teachings, and with the community, the practices and the community. And I could just feel how these monastics knew how to live together in loving harmony. And at the end of the retreat, I said, okay, so now how do I participate in this? And the answer was, go back to your, go back home and then get involved in Sangha building. And I knew what that meant. I knew that was the equivalent of building the beloved community, which I had heard from the pulpit from Tom Owenthal, and knew that came from Martin Luther King, and from another source before that, whom I don't remember. But that's what we did, and we've never looked back.
And Thich Nhat Hanh is probably the second most well-known Buddhist teacher in the world, next to the Dalai Lama. And they were connected as well. I'll show you a picture with them together. And Thich Nhat Hanh was the founder of the Plum Village tradition of Zen Buddhism. And he is a gentle person, kind, peaceful, a peace activist, but did it from peace rather than an angry peace activist, and an environmentalist. He was a poet, amazing poetry. We'll share one of his poems this evening. And a writer. He's produced, well, we were told more than 100 books when we joined the practice 15 years ago, but I've seen about 20 more come out since then. So many, many, many books. And he also has done a beautiful job of taking traditional Buddhist texts from other languages and translating them into English, and accessible English. That's one of the reasons I'm drawn to this practice, is that Thay made things very easy to understand. He could be very heady, very intellectual, and he made the practice accessible. We, after participating in the Deer Park Monastery retreat, we did, as Keith mentioned, get involved with a local Sangha, and then that's morphed into what's now called the Open Heart Sangha. And both Keith and I followed Thich Nhat Hanh's process for becoming a member of his order. And it's called the Order of Interbeing, that he created back in the 1960s. And we went through a couple of years of training. For Keith, I think it was about 3 years, where we worked with Dharma teachers and mentors. And then Thich Nhat Hanh ordained us as members of his order in 2013. And we'll show you a picture of us in our formal brown coat.
One of the ways Thay described our practice is, and I can just imagine him doing this with a little bit of a twinkle in his eye and a slightly mischievous smile, as he would often do. He said, our practice is a gentle encounter with reality.
So we went to Vietnam in January. We were invited by one of the senior monks at Deer Park Monastery as Order of Interbeing members to join with practitioners from all over the world to honor Thich Nhat Hanh on his second year after his death. And we'll tell you more about that sacred timing in the Vietnamese world. And so we went to Vietnam and met up with practitioners like we were, other Order of Interbeing members from 31 different countries to honor Thay, learn his history. He died at age 96, I believe it was. And the last 7 years of his life, he was not able to formally teach because he had a severe stroke in 2014. So that was a huge loss, but his teachings continue in so many videos on YouTube and books and monasteries all over the world. So I think we're going to go ahead and turn on the slides. I use that as if I used to. So I'm going to share screen and okay, can people see that?
Yes.
Great. So this is a picture of the home where Thay's father lived in a rural community just outside of the city of Hue, which is in the middle of Vietnam. And it was delightful to meet a relative there. And so he was born near here. And then at age 16, he became a monk. Keith, you wanted to say something here?
He became a novice monk at 16, but he knew that this was his future long before that. He was a little boy, and his older brother had a magazine with a picture, a kind of a brush and ink or a pencil drawing of the Buddha sitting, and Thay saw that, and he saw the Buddha smiling, and he knew that the people around him were not smiling. They were struggling and they were largely unhappy. And when he saw that smile, he just thought, that's my calling, that's my direction, that's what I want my life to be about. And so as soon as he was allowed by his parents, when he was 16, he joined the monastic order.
And that was in Hue, where you'll see many of the pictures and where we spent most of our time. And here he is as a somewhat young monk meeting with Martin Luther King Jr. and was very desirous of bringing the Americans into a more aware mode of what was going on in Vietnam with the war. And since Martin Luther King Jr. has been a peace activist, the two of them struck a nice relationship.
And Martin later nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize.
And the Dalai Lama also spent a little bit of time with Thay. So there are our two most famous Buddhists in the world joining together. You can just imagine what they might be saying. And this is the Thay that we knew. We got involved when he was later in life, but so alive, so vibrant, an amazingly gentle, kind, sweet person who moved slowly. He almost floated. And we were with him for a 3-week retreat in Plum Village, his main home monastery in France. probably 4 months before his stroke. And he looked very much like this at the time. Outstanding teacher. You know, to be in your late 80s and to be so vibrant and such an outstanding communicator was such a treasure to be around him.
He was described by one of his most senior monks as being at the peak of his teaching at that time.
And he traveled the world. This is a program that he was putting on somewhere where he brings a whole entourage of monastics, monks and nuns, and would lead chanting and give Dharma talks, lead walking meditations. While we were in Hue, at the main root temple, they've set up just across the street from the temple a little museum that showed his simple belongings. These are Thay's actual slippers and bed, and it just shows a very sweet, simple life. And his table, books that he used. And he was also an extraordinary calligrapher. We have a couple of his calligraphies, and here is one of his well-known: peace in oneself, peace in the world. Oh, if we could really learn that, our world would be such a better place. And here we are at what's called the Root Temple, the temple where Thay was first ordained, where he lived for many years, was the abbot, and then returned to this temple at the end of his life to spend his last 3 years here. And I wanted to show you the brown jackets that we as Order of Interbeing members wear for special occasions or while traveling with the group. It was also a wonderful jacket to wear when it was too warm to wear a coat, but not quite warm enough to go with just a shirt sleeve. And we were there when there's still pandemic issues. And Keith and I were fairly careful because we were traveling with so many different people. I mean, people from so many different countries, and everybody was on and off airplanes, and we were in buses for up to 6 hours at a time. We wore masks almost all the time when we were indoors. We had to eat without a mask, but when we were outdoors, we'd pull our masks down, or if we were in crowded situations, we would wear them. So now we're going to share with you a few photos from both rural and urban Vietnam, but we went as spiritual pilgrims. So we don't know a lot about the culture, other than what we did reading before we went and after we've come back, but we weren't like regular tourists, just popping from one tourist site to another, but did want to show you just some of the scenes. This is actually in Hanoi, as is this. They had beautiful lakes in Hanoi, right in the city. Fairly crowded. Motorcycles. Oh my gracious. Keith, do you want to tell them about motorcycles?
It's like a river. They just flow, and they flow around obstacles, they flow around people, and 60% of the people in Vietnam get around on motorcycles. And you'd see 50 in one group at an intersection. And so crossing, and there's more or less no rules. I mean, people drive in the wrong direction on one-way streets. It's quite amazing that it all works. But it's an act of great faith to cross the street there. And you get these instructions everywhere. Just start walking, don't stop, and they will flow around you. And sure enough, I didn't see anybody get hit.
And you can see quite a few decorations here. We were there 2 weeks before Tet, the biggest holiday of the year there, which is their Vietnamese New Year. And color and flowers and candies and sweets everywhere, but red is the main color. And then a more rural scene, beautiful, gentle mountains, heavily forested, farms in little villages, rivers, rivulets. This is also in Hue, the fragrant, what is the name of the river?
Is it
Fragrant
perfume river or
Perfume
fragrant
river.
river?
And sometimes it had a scent of perfume. The flowers that were near it apparently gave it some scent. This is the beach in Da Nang. Beautiful, beautiful beach. They took us just for an outing one afternoon.
I believe that is a statue of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion.
Which was part of the worship service that Reverend Kristen did 2 weeks ago, week and a half ago.
That building, there's nothing wrong with our photography. That building is actually curvy.
This is close to where we stayed for the first week and a half we were there. Back into the city. This is the One Stupa Pagoda, and I wanted to show it to you because those curved lines of the roof were what inspired Thich Nhat Hanh to create the similar image as the symbol of the Plum Village practice. And so all of our monasteries have something that is shaped like that.
And the Ocean of Peace Meditation Hall at Deer Park Monastery in Escondido, one of a dozen or so that he has in the world, is a awesome building using this kind of architecture.
So just a few more various scenes. And these are a couple just showing the amazing color and rich offering of different kinds of decorations and sweets for Tet. Including in the temples where we were visiting ancestors of Thais and honoring different Buddhist teachers and leaders. And they have these displays that different companies that are selling their products give to the monasteries. It's so funny to see everything so serious, and there are bells and there are prostrations that everybody bows to the ancestors. And then you've got these kinds of Tet celebrations. And Tet's celebrated very, in a very big way at Deer Park Monastery each year. Signs all over the cities about the new year. And I thought it was just fascinating to see that the symbol on the left is the communist symbol, and the one on the right is the star from the flag of Vietnam. So it's a little startling sometimes to think about the fact that it's a communist country. Keith, do you want to?
This is where we were told to expect, very modest accommodations. So we weren't expecting to wander into this tropical paradise as where we were going to stay, our main place to stay in Hue. But this was quite extraordinary, and it was right. That Perfume River runs just on the other side of the walkway through this property.
I think the Plum Village tradition does very beautifully at preparing their participants for special occasions by first inviting them early enough to have a retreat. And so we spent 3 days in retreat here. Part of the day was in silence. We would have meditation time, meals in silence, some singing, a Dharma talk, walking meditation, which you'll see in a moment, and then a chance to bond with the participants that we were there with. So then once we got into the celebrations that we were there to experience, we already felt like we were a community.
We had a be-in one night, and I hadn't expected to be invited to sing. Those are usually only groups participate in those, but
It's like a talent show.
yeah, but no competition. And but it turns out there was a guitar, and I was invited, and I sang one of the songs I've written called "We Are the Cosmos." I taught everybody the chorus so they could all sing along, and for the next 2 weeks I had people coming up to me going, "Your song meant so much to me." I just never got so much love for sharing a song before.
And now he shares it with our Sangha. We are all learning it. Whoops, just a moment. And we had exercise time. The monk leading us is one of the most senior monks in the practice and is at Deer Park Monastery.
Fa Pyung.
And an amazing buffet of food, 3 meals a day. I came home quite a bit heavier, but it was extraordinary. And then they would give us presentations. These are the monastics that spent the most time with us and gave us insights to Thay's life. All of them have studied his writings and his letters and shared stories of Thay's life, which was really quite a beautiful process to learn from them. So here is the gate to the Tu Hu Temple, where Thay started his monastic life and ended his life. It's many acres of buildings. I thought this was just the door into a building, but there are acres and acres of space with different temples and pagodas and meeting spaces. And one of our leaders would gather us wherever we were and tell us stories. These were the most animated, sweet nuns who went everywhere with us and took excellent care of us. Both of them have spent significant time in the United States, much of their lives, even though they are Vietnamese. And so they were able to beautifully share in English with us all. And Keith, do you want to talk about this?
So one of the most precious moments for me was being told that when Thay first came to the monastery at 16, his job was to tend to the cows. So he would go into the main part of the village and he would collect the cows and he would walk them up here to this pasture area. He would make beds for them. He would collect grasses and make a bed for them, and then they would rest, and he would study his sutras and do his chanting, and then at the end of the day he would collect all of the grass in which they had deposited their treasured fertilizer and bring it back to the village while he led the cows home. And just imagining that just warms my heart, makes me smile.
So now we're moving into the time of the big celebrations for the second anniversary since his death. And that particular milestone in one's life as a spiritual teacher was very, very important. And it marked the time where people could stop grieving after 2 years after the death, and where he becomes a spiritual ancestor. So it's a precious time, and a time when his sacred objects are moved to a place where they will be held in perpetuity so that people can come and visit. So this is one of the celebration, the first evening, where for 2 hours we stood and listened to chanting in Vietnamese, had no idea what they were saying. Many things we had translations, but this we didn't, but it was pretty extraordinary. So colorful, and people gathered in the temple from all over. This wasn't just our tradition, but people in other Buddhist traditions also came to honor Thay at this 2-year mark. And some of the events then, if you couldn't get close enough to what was actually happening, they would have them projected on a screen, and we could sit and have earphones on. Then the great memorial ceremony happened on January 29th, the biggest event of the time we were there. And this happened to be Keith's birthday. So he thought it was a pretty special birthday gift to have the ceremony on his birthday.
One heck of a way to celebrate a birthday.
So these are other OI members from other parts of the world and here in the US who have come as part of our team. And we were very fortunate that because we were OI, we were able to stay right next to the beginning of the procession, where Thay's objects were taken from one building over to the final resting place. And then they would move things from one place to another. It was kind of a set of processions we didn't fully understand. It got a little more elaborate than what our leaders had prepped us for, but it was pretty wonderful to be right there. And bless Loretta. Loretta was watching this on simulcast YouTube and took a picture of Keith and me right at the beginning of the one of the processions. And so she sent the picture, and I thought it'd be sweet to include it. It's the only one where both of us are in it. I've got lots of pictures with Keith in them, and Keith's got pictures with me, but Loretta captured us both. And I want to show you a part of this video. It kind of jumps around sometimes, so I don't know how it'll go. But this monk is the one doing the simulcast videotaping. And to watch how somebody kind of guides him backwards while he's videotaping what's going on, we'll watch a little bit of it. Some things in our practice are joyous and loud and fun. These kinds of ceremonies tend to be sedate, serious. So it's such an honor to be able to stand right there and to be videotaping this while they're walking by me. These ceremonial walks through the temple grounds went on for almost 3 hours from one place to another, and there's meaning for different ones, different items they were carrying. So I think I'll stop it there. You can just get a sense. Now, if I can get it to move on, whoops.
There were 400 monastics in our Plum Village tradition and hundreds more from other traditions around the world.
So this is Thay's hut, where he lived his last 3 years, and now they've turned it into a sacred shrine. And we've got bushes between us and what they're doing. There wasn't enough space to get up close, but we were able to see and hear parts of it. I think this is where you'll hear some of the chanting. They brought in chanters from other places who were professional chanters. They were quite remarkable.
Yeah, Wei is known for its chanting.
Nope, I guess the previous one was the chanting. Let's see if I can get that back. So you can see here, there's a screen up here, what's going on inside of the building. And so you could either try to stand on the outside and just listen, or you could sit and watch the screen while listening.
That recording didn't work well over Zoom, but I had a good seat found a little place to sit down and close my eyes and listen to the chanting, and it was just magical. It was so complex with overlaid rhythms and harmonies, and it was like a symphony orchestra in its level of complexity, and it was wonderful.
Here you are at your perch.
Yep.
And so now they're preparing for the next round of procession to come in. And I'm going to share the video a little bit here. And at one point, they will be bringing in Thay's urn of ashes. I found it remarkable that the photographers were just walking around and that this could all be captured live and shared across the whole world for the 3 hours. You can still get it on YouTube, although if you're not there, it's not quite as interesting. So here comes the urn of his remains. Some of his remains were sent to all of the monasteries in his tradition, and each one had ceremonies to allow practitioners to help scatter the ashes around the monasteries. And here is where the urn is placed and will be available for all practitioners to come. And Keith, would you like to read the poem about contemplating limitless life? Thay taught us that life doesn't start at birth and end at death. It continues. We are his continuation. He is a continuation of all of his ancestors. So I think it's beautifully captured in this poem.
Contemplating Limitless Life by Thich Nhat Hanh. I see that this body, made of the four elements, is not really me, and I am not limited by this body. I am the whole river of life, of blood ancestors and spiritual ancestors, that has been continuously flowing for thousands of years and flows on for thousands of years into the future. I am one with my ancestors and my descendants. I am life manifesting in countless different forms. I am one with all peoples and all species, whether they are peaceful and joyful or suffering and afraid. At this very moment, I am present everywhere in this world. I have been present in the past and will be there in the future. The disintegration of this body does not touch me, just as when the petals of the plum blossom fall, it does not mean the end of the plum tree. I see that I am like a wave on the surface of the ocean. I see myself in all the other waves, and I see all the other waves in me. The manifestation or disappearance of the wave does not lessen the presence of the ocean. My Dharma body and spiritual life are not subject to birth or death. I am able to see my presence outside this body, even in the present moment. 80 or 90 years is not my lifespan. My lifespan, like that of a leaf or of a Buddha, is immeasurable. I am able to go beyond the idea that I am a body separate from other manifestations of life in time and in space. Mother Earth in me, smiling to the most beautiful planet in our solar system. I am a child of the sun. I am a star. I am my ancestors, playing my part in the immortality of my ancestors, smiling to the stars and galaxies in me, playing my part in the immortality of stars and cosmos. Nothing is created, nothing is destroyed. I am free from being, free from non-being. Visited several temples.
Nope, that's the end. Thank you. Thank you. So that was the end of the formal ceremony at the Tuhu Temple. Oh, this is where we got the chance then to go up close and bow before Thay's altar there. Sorry about that. I can't turn it off. So each of us got a chance to get up close and to bow. And I just wanted to share one picture of Brother Phap Hu, who is the abbot at Plum Village in France, our main home monastery. And he has been a monastic there since he was 16 or 17 and became the abbot, I think, when he was 21. So I think it's miraculous that in this practice that we could have such a young leader. Nobody is replacing Thich Nhat Hanh. He set it up very intentionally that nobody would be a single teacher like he had created for the practice, but that it would be shared among many monastics and lay members. but this is just a sweetheart of one of the abbots.
I think he was actually 14 when he became
Okay.
a monk there, and there's a saying that the next Buddha will be a sangha. With sangha is the community of practitioners, and Thay has embodied that.
And as happens after many formal ceremonies, there's lots of food, feasting. And our group of 130 people had been invited to gather the night before this big ceremony and help prepare help prepare the food for everybody. So Keith and I were assigned mushroom pulling apart meditation time to prepare. So this is his part. I'm working on a different kind of mushroom, and the monastics are cooking food. They prepared food, I believe, for 10,000 people to have lunch. Just everybody could come in, and here's the kitchen the night before doing the preparations. And then the tables were all laid out and plastic put on or like saran wrap put on all of the dishes, so that when all the ceremonial aspects were done, people could just flow in and sit down and eat. It was quite a beautiful feast. And then everybody stands in line to wash their own dishes. Can you imagine doing dishes for 10,000? Now we have jumped to the part where I'm just going to show you a few pictures of where Thay taught when he was a young monastic, and it's still a place of learning, and where some of his ancestors were honored. We got the sense of the progression, the whole long lineage since the Buddha, through different leaders, monastics, and one of the patriarchs of our particular lineage is buried here within, or cremains are in this stupa. Then the final ceremonial activities in Hue took place where Thay's cremation took place. Many of us 2 years before had watched all of the cremation occur, and the transporting of the body from Tu Hu Temple up to this site where he was put to rest. No, that's a poor term, but where he was cremated. And it's a beautiful mountainous scene, a ceremony honoring him. And this nun is Sister Chong Kong, who is his longest term disciple, who also was the first nun that he ordained to become a nun. And she's in her mid-80s and still deeply involved in the practice. And right now they are developing a film about her. She's probably the most famous female Buddhist in history. And the magnificent statue of the Buddha on the grounds where he was cremated, and where there's signage honoring him and his life. And we were all invited to do walking meditation around the whole area. And it was very, very sweet to join with people from all over the world doing this. Then the last area I want to show you is called Phong Boi. This is now where we have traveled to the southern part of the country. We flew into what was Saigon and now Ho Chi Minh City, and taking several hour bus ride outside of the city, we come to this area in the mountains that is in English called Fragrant Palm Leaves. And this is the site where Thich Nhat Hanh and some of his friends joined together to create a little community. They were a happy little bunch of people that you can read a whole book from him about this very sweet time in Phung Boy, or Phung Boy, they call it, where they created a meditation hall and a kitchen and had days of mindfulness and social activities. It was the sweetest time of his life. And then when he came to the United States to try to be a peace activist and wanted to go back to Vietnam, he was prevented from coming back. The government exiled him, and he was in exile for almost 40 years. But this site is where he created the first community that became the Plum Village tradition. And we were invited to take off our shoes and walk where Thay walked. And there was this real deep sense of connection with him. And knowing that he had walked all of this area.
And the book about it is titled Fragrant Palm Leaves. It's one of the few autobiographical things that he wrote.
So we learned about some of his poetry. We read some of his poetry by one of our monks, who's also at Deer Park. And Thay planted these trees. And to be there where he had been back in the early 60s, and the trees are much bigger now, but it was quite a scene, a very special, moving experience. And the cistern that held the water for that small community. And they've got these 2 rows of trees that you walk through that also was replicated there in Plum Village, where they've got lines of trees that they take walking meditation from. So there's this sense of continuity that was pretty extraordinary. So these are all the Phung Boy or Fragrant Palm Leaves area that became the first Plum Village community. So we got to share a picnic with our community. And Thay built this building as part of their little community, but then had another Buddhist leader move into it, and he is still alive. He's not in it anymore, but he's over 100 years old and became the second most well-known Vietnamese Buddhist teacher. Not necessarily known out of Vietnam, but within Vietnam. And that's the last picture of the slide. So I'm going to stop sharing. And now I just want to share a few of my reflections. Keith will step in here too. First of all, it was such a sense of being a part of a community that's international. And to know that there are practitioners who are trying to learn to be kind and gentle and peaceful and to honor the earth. Thay was such a beautiful lover of the earth. And so to have the feeling of being a part of the whole was pretty extraordinary. I don't think we as UUs quite get that feeling because there aren't as many of us, and we aren't in so many countries. I mean, we were with people from Africa and Eastern Europe and the Ukraine and just all over the world. So that was really sweet for me. And to recognize that we're part of a 2,600-year lineage, that Buddha was before Jesus did his teaching. And so this has continued through Thay. And I think the most important feeling, takeaway, inspiration for me was that I am Thay's continuation. That by my being a Sangha builder and using meditation to try to learn to be at peace with myself and in the world, I am continuing Thay's work. And by building Sangha, as Loretta and Tom are, that's my reason for being right now, is to support that. Keith, do you want to talk about your experience with the quality of the people in the community?
Yeah, we in our of those of us who were at this on this particular journey, I think there were 140 of us, and whenever I was, sharing a meal and we had some conversation time, the people that I was with were just beautiful and extraordinary to a person. So it was very, I was very grateful to be in a community that was, such wonderful fellow practitioners, and the whole community was it's like a great homecoming, and it just made me know that it's really good to be a part of this practice.
And related to that, I felt so blessed to share it with Keith. We have challenges in our marriage. We get into fights. We have arguments. Today was one of them. But that we are co-practitioners. We are definitely sharing this practice. And Loretta has been a deep member of that practice all along with us. To have the three of us in our family so deeply rooted together, and now Tom is a part of that as well. It's just a blessed experience to share the practice with our family. And greater appreciation for my Sangha also, to come home, to be with my Sangha. That's my second spiritual home. You are my first spiritual home, being Unitarian Universalist. And so to meld those and to have our Buddhist Sangha, the Open Heart Sangha, meeting at the church is a very treasured experience for me. Do you have any last thing, honey, before we open it up?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So thank you for listening attentively. And so we open if you want comments or questions. Sylvia.
Thank you so much for that lovely presentation. It was so interesting. Being the feminist I am, I'm curious about the monastic procession, because it hit me that there were no women in it at all. And so I'm wondering what Thich Nhat Hanh thought about women's equality.
Oh, thank you. I'm really glad you brought that up, because in the videos, the monastics that were at the beginning were of another tradition. They were not our Plum Village tradition. Within our Plum Village tradition, there are many, many nuns. There are more nuns at Deer Park Monastery than monks. I don't know throughout the whole thing what the proportion is, but Thay believed very deeply in honoring women, having them in leadership roles. Some of the most notable monastics right now, like Sister True Dedication, she's able to be just as up front as a leader as any of the men. When Thay writes, perhaps not some of his earlier writing, but as he writes, or he did write, obviously he's not writing right now, or speaking, he goes back and forth with he and she. He's very attuned to equality. So that's one of the things I have treasured also about him. But you're right, you didn't see it in that procession. If I'd shown the whole procession, you'd see so many of the nuns within the Deer Park or the Plum Village tradition.
There is separation of the males and females, the monks and nuns. They live in different, like a particular monastery. Well, like in France, they have 3 different monasteries, and 2 of them are all women and 1 is all men. But up at Deer Park, in a formal ceremony, you would have the men on one side and the women on the other. But now it's been changed so that it's a U shape instead of 2 lines, and people are invited to place themselves anywhere on the spectrum that they feel comfortable.
Deep appreciation of the non-binary members of our community.
Thank you.
Within the procession, what are so I noticed them carrying like sort of the umbrellas and the sticks. What are those?
Who knows? No, I don't really know. And unfortunately, while we were in some of those situations, we didn't have somebody that we could ask all the questions of. And then by the time you get back together with the group, there are so many other things going on and so many other stories. So those kinds of things I'd love to know, but we don't know.
There's a term in French I understand called bondirserie, and kind of like spiritual paraphernalia. I think it's like part of the celebration is to have colorful things.
Yeah. Certainly adds to the aura of the whole thing. That's for sure. They're elegant.
Yes, yes. And it's interesting because the practice and Thay's whole tradition honors the earth, simplicity, brown color, which is the color of the earth, the dirt, the farmers working the dirt. And then they've got their Sangati robes, the bright gold for special occasions. But basically the monastics in this tradition each have just 2 or 3 outfits, and they're all brown, the same color brown as our brown jackets. And so when we became the Order of Interbeing members, we were also honoring that care of the earth, and food comes from the earth and you work the soil. So they have both, but mostly it's brown everywhere.
Yeah, one of the monks after we were ordained said, welcome to the brown jackets.
Well, I grew up, this is Caroline. I grew up with brown. My school colors were brown, green, and yellow. So I would not have had any trouble.
Earth tones.
Yes. Yeah. So it was a really lovely thing. I came in late and I'm sorry, but it was well worth getting there.
Oh,
So,
good. Well, and you'll get the recording, so if you want to
yes,
see the beginning.
yes, yeah.
So our
Mhm.
Sangha meets twice a week, every week, no matter if it's on Christmas Day or Mother's Day. We meet once at the church on Sundays from 4 to 5:30 and on Tuesdays on Zoom. And so if anybody ever wanted to check us out, you're welcome. You don't have to be Buddhist. We want to be together to learn to live in harmony, in community, learn to meditate, use meditation as a way to deal with our suffering. All of us suffer somehow. It doesn't mean that we are facing somebody killing us or suffering because we've lost a leg. It can be suffering because we don't feel like we are enough, like we have to work too hard to prove ourselves, or like we can't please enough people. There are many ways to suffer. So the practice is to learn how to acknowledge, hold the suffering, transform it, and come to the community with a more peaceful, more centered, more kind way of being. So if you want to try us out, you're welcome to.
Buddhism and Unitarian Universalism have something very important in common. We are both non-creedal religions. We don't believe in believing. The practice, in the Buddhist tradition, we practice in order to gain insight. So the practices are, like physicists do thought experiments. Well, we do meditation experiments to see what depths of experience and insight we can find.
One thing I forgot to mention about Thay is that he is the great proponent of social justice action.
Oh, yeah.
Sylvia, you'd probably really enjoy some of his readings because you are such a beautiful social justice advocate. And he believed in not just staying on the cushion meditating, but to do something in the world. For me at the moment, that something is to build Sangha and to be a steady force at the UU Church for this Sangha. And so I put a fair amount of time into holding the Sangha kind of together. That's my action at this time. And he created what's called engaged Buddhism. Not all Buddhist sects do that.
Tell me, what time on a Tuesday is the Zoom?
5:30 to 6:30 p.m.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh,
Any other questions? Or thoughts?
oh,
Question. Yeah, what did he do during the war, the Vietnam War? Was he in the US then, did you say?
He was in the US at Princeton and Columbia studying and teaching comparative religion in 1964, at which time he got the call to come back to Vietnam. He was needed. The war was what they call the American War, was heating up, and there was a lot of suffering, and he was asked to come home, and he just beelined it back to Vietnam, and he set up the School for Youth for Social Service in Hue, which is right in the middle between what was North Vietnam and South Vietnam. So this right in the heat of the war zone. The bullets were flying, the bombs were dropping, and they essentially set up a monastery there. So the likelihood was that he would be killed. I mean, it's grenades were thrown into his hut twice. Once it got caught in the curtain and then swung back out and fell down on the ground outside. And the other time he wasn't there. He had left for America on the peace tour, which would be when he was exiled. So he was very angry with the other Buddhist sects that were hanging out in their monasteries when people were suffering. So They went out when the villages were bombed and they rebuilt the villages. And the villages were bombed and they went out and they rebuilt them again. And of course, they tended to the sick and the dying and the grieving. So they were fearless. And they had a practice where every week they took an entire day for practice, where they didn't leave their monastery, because he knew that in order to be able to do this work sustainably and not burn out, you have to take care of yourself. And so they came together and practiced for a full day every week.
And called the lazy day. And now Order of Interbeing members, one of the things that we agree to when we are ordained is that we will commit to taking a day of laziness each week. Now, we don't always do it, or you could do it if you take a week-long retreat, that'll count for 7 days of it. But overall, approximately every week, we're to take time off, do practice, be gentle with ourselves, don't have outside commitments, so that we can be refreshed and available to the world.
It's a very sensible idea.
I
Sure.
apologize if this is a kind of a sharp left turn.
Go
but
for it.
Okay, and I really appreciate the presentation you've given tonight.
Thank you.
What would be the stand on reproductive justice in this world?
Funny, I don't know that I don't know.
Okay,
That's
I'm
interesting.
sorry to throw you
Yeah.
a left curve.
No,
Yeah.
that's a good question.
My sense is it's true. It hasn't really been an issue that's been talked about, but in general, there are even the precepts. What used to be called precepts became mindfulness trainings. So these are the guidelines are things to contemplate and make your own decisions. So I think there's a great deal of respect for people making their own choices,
Yeah.
using their own hearts and minds.
Yeah.
And Thich Nhat Hanh took the 5 precepts of the Buddha, created those 5 mindfulness trainings, and then occasionally would update them for what's going on in the world right now. Things like they didn't have electronics and social media back when the Buddha was alive. And so part of one of the trainings is to try to not abuse media, or to let's see, what's the other part of that one? But he has modified things and then created 14 mindfulness trainings, which was way beyond what the Buddha did. And that's what I find to be the most beautiful, full way of being in the world that gives us almost the answer to everything. I hate, and it seems funny to say that as a you, but it's a guide, a signpost for how to be in the world, and it's beautiful. The 14 mindfulness trainings are incredible, and they address being open-minded and socially just and kind and deep listening.
Thank you so much.
So a mindfulness training would last how long?
It's a practice that you do for your life.
Meaning you don't have to do it perfectly.
Right. So but you train people how to do that, right?
Part of the practice, meeting at the monasteries, spending time with the monastics and the other lay Dharma teachers, is to learn how to put those mindfulness trainings into practice and to try to follow them as a guiding light, a boat taking us on the river. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just kind of trying to picture it. A training is usually like a book with so much information in it, and then you train somebody through the book, and then they do it for life
Well,
or whatever. Does that sound like what it is?
Every month, our Sangha recites the 5 mindfulness trainings, or 2 times, 2 months in a row, the 5 are recited. The 3rd month, the 14. And so every month we're reviewing those and asking ourselves, am I trying to follow it? And we share with the group how we are or not meeting the suggestions. Loretta, you had your hand.
Yes. Oh, this has been wonderful. Oh, gosh.
Yes.
When the question was asked about Vietnam, something came to my mind that Thay did not take sides there. That was really an important part, from my understanding, is that during the war. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons that they were so vulnerable when they were in Hue, because they could have been killed by either side.
And Thay also brought together Israelis and Palestinians at the monasteries to have them learn these practices and learn how to speak with one another and to be able to try to learn to live in community with one another. He did some remarkable retreats in that arena, and I'm sure that he would be just horrified to know what was going on right now. But he would not, again, take sides, but would work to bring people together. Caroline.
Why do they all shave their heads?
Saves money on shampoo.
Ah, get off it.
I think I mean, they have said that it's part of taking away one of the things that we use to try to distinguish ourselves, to embellish ourselves like we are something special. That if none of them have hair and they all wear brown, they are all supportive of the community. The community is more important for a monastic than an individual.
Yes. Yes. So
yeah.
how come you people don't shave your heads?
I am not a monastic. I live out in the world, but I don't do a lot of embellishment. I don't do makeup.
No.
I don't wear fancy clothes.
Yes, you
but-
do, but they're your fancy clothes. They're gorgeous, huh? Anyway, I hear what you're saying. I understand. Thank you.
Yeah. There's a beautiful teaching in our practice of the wave and the water. And you heard a little bit of the wave and ocean in the poem that Keith read.
Yes.
But the idea is that we are all the ocean, all of being, all of life, all of everything is the ocean. And there are waves. And so we can be an individual that rises as a wave. I have my particularities. I respond differently to things than Keith does. But he and I are both the ocean. And so we are both connected. We are both one. And so the wave and the water, to me, is a beautiful way to allow me to be an individual, but also to acknowledge my oneness with all.
One of Thay's contributions to the world is the concept interbeing. And he did a lot of contemplating to come up with that word. And it applies to, we inter-are with each other, with all beings and with the whole of being. And so the contemplation of interbeing is a very powerful meditation.
Let's get, Rosalba has one more question, and then I'm gonna jump back in to extinguish that chalice.
I'd like to ask a question too.
Carl, do you want to go first? Mine is more a comment than a question. Go ahead.
Does work continue between Palestinians and Israelis?
Yes. And there is a very, very active listserv where OI members across the world are engaged in communication about it. I haven't taken part in it. I get the feed every day, but yes, there are sanghas all over the world that are working to try to bring about a more peaceful approach, but I can't tell you what they're doing.
There are sanghas particularly related to that topic.
There are. There
Any
is.
idea-
I don't know how many, but I know I've seen it on this listserv that I don't know what they call themselves, but it is one that they are working to try to bridge.
Where would I likely find information on that?
I would have to look up some of my email and see what's there, Carl, and I can get back to you to see if I can find it.
That would be great.
Or you could also try a search in Plum Village sanghas related to this issue. I don't, as I say, I haven't been following it, but I'll check.
And there is a list of all the sanghas in the world on the Plum Village website.
Yeah, and I don't know, this is so new that I'm not sure if it's been updated on that international list.
I'll check that.
Great.
Thank you, and I really enjoyed your presentation tonight.
Thank
Thanks,
you, Carl.
Carl.
Glad you're here. And Rosalba.
I'm really fascinated by this idea of practicing. I just went last Friday to listen to the daughter of Martin Luther King. And, you know, I learned so much. One of the things I didn't know is that he received the Nobel Prize for Peace. I had no idea. And then he gave a speech about the importance of starting practicing nonviolent communication, that it's not something that you can think about. It's something that you need to start practicing and it becomes a way of being. So I'm wondering if there are some practices that you can share with all of us in the congregations that will lead us into start practicing nonviolent communication. Thank you.
Well, thank you. The practices we use are meditation, deep listening and deep sharing, loving speech, the 5 mindfulness trainings, the 14 mindfulness trainings. We are encouraged to do daily meditation. It can be sitting meditation, walking meditation. So these are the practices that we offer and share with one another in Sangha. And going to Sangha is a practice because we find that we can support one another in these various practices better if we come together regularly, build community, share what we're doing in our practice, what our difficulties are with practice, and what our benefits are.
Yeah, getting involved in a sangha is really important. Regular support is the best. But there are also books of meditations, and there are recorded meditations. There's an app called the Plum Village app, which has vast resources. So there are, guided recordings of guided meditations and written meditations. So however works best for you to take that in. the practices are available there.
I won't, before Tony takes over, I want to thank you all so much for coming, and for Tony for setting this up. Thank you. I love you all. Hope to see you at church and or Sangha.
Well, thank you both for taking to do this and for a lovely presentation. Thank you so much
Yes.
for sharing.
Thanks, Tony.
So I have a final few words from Thich Nhat Hanh as we extinguish our chalice. This is from, well, it was posted in 2021. I don't know if he said it in 21. You do not have to wait until the flame has gone out to be reborn. I am reborn many times every day. Every moment is a moment of rebirth. So thank you all. Keep an eye out for what we may do over the summer. I don't have anything scheduled in the Zoom world, but we do have camp coming up. Tomorrow is the last day if you haven't registered yet and you want to go. To actually do some mindfulness and meditation up at Camp Benneville Pines. And then we have our first of 3 summer in-person get-togethers. We're going to do it on the first one is on June 22nd in the afternoon, right down the street from me in Savita Park, which is a lovely space if you've not been. So hope to see you there, and thank you all for coming.